This is the Absurdist's Bible. Hey, that thing that's in you, that's like what's in me too. There's love in there. I hadn't planned on making a video about a Vonnegut book quite so soon in the life of the channel. I want to go through all of the Vonnegut books eventually and just sort of touch on each one of them. I have a lot to say about Vonnegut, but I felt compelled to make this video. It just seems right for the moment for some reason. There's a lot that I have on my mind about this book in particular that I've been holding in for a long time, and I feel empowered with the channel now to just sort of say some of these things. So I'm going to say them. This is Slapstick. It's also known as Lonesome No More. It's a book about loneliness. This is the Absurdist Bible. What do I mean by that? So generally, when we think of absurdism in a philosophical context, what we're talking about is the general notion that the universe is itself absurd and that it is generally meaningless. This is different from nihilism, though. Nihilism takes it a little bit further. Absurdism doesn't suggest that the world is meaningless and there's no point to the universe. Absurdism says the world's meaningless and there's no point to the universe. Subtle difference, I realize, but there's a difference. This book is, in many ways, the genesis of this philosophy within myself. I had a really great older friend of mine. He was a close friend of my brother's, and my brother is much older than I am. And when I met this guy, we both connected on the reading level. He could see that I was young and foolish and weird, and then I probably needed some good advice when it came to what to read, who to read, how to read. But one of the other, literary suggestion that he gave was Vonnegut, and I read the first book that he told me to read, which was Slaughterhouse-Five, and it's a great first Vonnegut book. I think if you're gonna read Vonnegut, this is the gateway. Slaughterhouse-Five is definitely the gateway, and it is as good as everyone says it is. It is a profoundly amazing book. And of course, once I read it, I was completely hooked. There was something about the insistence on humanity in Slaughterhouse-Five and the recognition of the lack of humanity that really stuck with me as a 13-year-old kid that grew up in Mississippi. And I followed that book up. I had the entire, Vonnegut repertoire there on the shelf in the early 90s. And the next book that I chose was Slapstick. And I didn't have any recommendations. I had no knowledge of the book. I had never read a critical review of it. I was going in completely blind, just knowing that whoever this Vonnegut guy is simpatico to me on a deep level. So the book itself centers around two characters, a twin brother and a sister, and they grow up in this environment of obscene wealth, but the parents are completely checked out to the point that they believe the children to be blithering idiots, when in fact, the children are early savants. And they put on this show to convince the parents, even from an infantile age, they put on this show to convince the parents that they're nothing but blithering idiots. And the parents respond by sort of making this protective household within this mansion for them to be cared for by staff and waited on hand and foot. And in the presence of any human, they just act in a completely uncontrolled, spastic manner. And in the evening, when everyone is asleep, they go down to the basement and they teach themselves Greek, and they read books from the library and the household, and they grow a massive amount of knowledge. And for me, as a young person in Mississippi, there was something about this description that really struck me. If you're, a halfway intelligent kid and you've got a moderate level of empathy, generally Mississippians don't accept that very well. And I'm being as delicate as I can because I don't want to necessarily be offensive, but I got picked on enough as a kid for using big words that you find that when you're amongst people who do not care and are generally not caring humans, then sometimes the only way to really fit in is to be a blithering idiot. So, the unfortunate things about this book are not the book itself. The book itself is genius. Early on, when it was published in 1976, it got some really, really, really bad critical reviews, and followed up in the early 80s with a film version that was a total flop that starred Jerry Lewis, of all people. Now, in my humble opinion, Jerry Lewis is possibly the worst thing that ever happened to comedy, and he's the worst thing that ever happened to Saturday afternoon television. And for a book that is explicitly dedicated to Laurel and Hardy, it is offensive to have Jerry Lewis, who clearly didn't get the book, he did not understand it, probably didn't read it. He just made an absolute mockery of it in the film. And it's something that I don't ever want to experience again. It's deeply painful to watch. And that is the memory that people have of this book. Even people who love Vonnegut, they fall back on, oh yeah, but Slapstick was kind of, and that movie was like, and they've got really big opinions on it. And I genuinely think that there's so many good Vonnegut books that most people will read the known good ones that everyone talks about. They'll read Cat's Cradle, they'll read Breakfast of Champions, they'll read Slaughterhouse-Five, and those are all amazing books that have nothing but good things to say about. But in their mode of time management, many people, I think, dismiss this book out of hand because of the sort of rap that it has. And I think that's absolute horseshit. And I think that people are doing themselves a great disservice by avoiding this book. Of the two main characters, the brother and the sister, as they approach young adulthood, they throw off the ruse of being mentally incapacitated and sort of assume their roles in the world. The sister disappears to China, and the brother goes on about his life. He ends up running for president. And one of the greatest things about this book is the amazing recognition that on some level, America needs someone with deep empathy and an embracing attitude towards the absurd to become president. And, I think we all live in the future here. I think we know what we got instead. We didn't get an absurdist, an empathetic absurdist president. We got something else. But it's a misnomer on my own too, because in the book things don't turn out nicely. The main character has really great intentions for being president, and he actually runs on the motto, "Lonesome no more." He could see the inherent loneliness of individuals. He could see Americans that lacked connection and needed something more in their life than they could have. And I think the parallels with modern society are incredible. I mean, this book was written in '76, but here we are in the most interconnected society that has ever existed. And if you look around, people are miserably lonely. even people who are surrounded by other people sometimes are miserably lonely. And you can see this thirst for connection with people. And some people are more equipped to connect with others. As a solution, he decides to enlist the Social Security program to issue a new modified middle name for every American. So Daffodil 19, Swan 31, whatever it was a strange middle name that was very distinct. And the idea being that if you're alone in this world, you suddenly have this greater extended family that exists in America. And you could go from town to town, and if you knew no one in that town or you had no family in that town, you could seek out the people with the similar middle name and or with the same middle name, and you could befriend them. They could let you couch surf, feed you dinner, give you directions, whatever the case may be. After a time, bars popped up that were specific to certain names. And it was this intentional community building that Vonnegut reemphasized a lot in his work. And that's something in particular I really want to talk about. A lot of what Vonnegut has to say is repeated over and over and over again, both in his books and in his lectures. And I mainly think that this is because he really wanted you to hear what he had to say. When Vonnegut talks about extended families, he also talks about the sadness of losing the extended family, lamenting in sort of a temporally conservative sort of way the days when multiple generations lived in the same household. You really did have a village to raise the family. And he genuinely thirsted for that sort of interfamilial connection in communities, and in even if it's a hybrid community or a synthesized community. His own children were adopted from his late sister. And I know that he had a lot of consternation about the sort of activities of children and childhood and youth and all that kind of stuff. But when he was in his writing studio tapping away and then turning and screaming at the children to just be quiet, he was focused on this notion of family and of community. And despite possibly his own just natural human cynicism, it's something that he recognized he needed in himself as much as everyone else needs it. A lot of people love to quote the Vonnegut quote where he says to the effect that, I have been resigned to the dustbin that is science fiction. And I don't think anybody understands that that is a tongue-in-cheek joke. And it's an opining. Vonnegut wasn't ashamed of being labeled a science fiction writer. He did it to himself because the literary world wouldn't do it for him. He looked at classic golden age science fiction and was deeply in love with it. And he has this alternate curse that is uncommon to a lot of people who want to write science fiction. There's so many people who want to write science fiction, or I should say there's so many people who want to write literary fiction. And the best that they can really muster is to find some footing in science fiction. But Vonnegut was the opposite. Vonnegut was a literary genius. He was a 20th century literary fiction author who desperately wanted the safety of the science fiction genre. He wanted to be insulated in science fiction. He wanted to feel the freedom that comes with writing science fiction. And in a way, I feel that he got away with as much as he could while staying true to this voice inside of him that said, you got to be serious about this. You got to be as serious as you can, Kurt. Which is difficult. He's not a serious man. But I think that that's the thing with a lot of people who are absurdists. And a lot of people who view the universe in the same deeply empathetic way that Vonnegut did, is that, they're cynical on some level, and they resent that cynicism, and they know that it's poison to them. And so they put pink flamingos in the yard, and they celebrate Festivus. They give themselves alternate middle names, and they make YouTube channels where they try to force a community into existence, where they try to synthesize the communication abilities of their time, whether it's letters or books or video or blogs, and they try to bring people together with special ideas that point to the things in their soul that say, hey, that thing that's in you, that's like what's in me too. There's love in there. And when you go out there and you encounter all of these humans that don't have any love in there, and you see it, and it hurts you, not because they hurt you, but because you can see that they are hurting. That's what Vonnegut makes you feel. That's what Vonnegut points out and then holds in his hands and says, this is the universe, and this is the meaning of life. Take good care of this. Take good care of your heart, and try to take good care of other people's hearts, because that is the only place that you really create meaning in a meaningless and absurd universe. I'm not going to say anything else about the plot. I want you to go read the book. I want you to ignore any criticism about the book that you may have read in the past, and I want you to approach it with fresh eyes. And I want you to read this book knowing that it is a book, it is the most human book. It is the absurdist's Bible. These are great claims I'm making, I understand, but I guarantee you, based on the limited credibility that I have with you, that you're going to take something away from this novel, because I know that you are a good person, and I know that you have love in your heart, and I know that the sadness of the world affects you, and I want you to have this book. I want you to carry it with you in your heart. I want you to take it, and I want you to let it live in you. People often refer to the Bible as the living word, and it's genuinely how I feel about Vonnegut. If there is a living word for our culture and our society and our place in this moment and in the cosmos, it's Vonnegut.